Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming down to the Williamsville Chapel. And what a nice crowd of people. This is one of the larger crowds we've had in the last few days over here. My name is Rick Rainey, and I'm the president of the Historical Society, and we have other important members, officers here. You can raise your hand if you're an officer or a board of director. Please look around. These people have kept the society going, and we've had some good times here. I'll just mention a couple quick things. Recently we had a spring cleaning up, which was really nice. We cut down a big, huge ash tree out there and cleaned out the backyard and cleaned inside here. And there was some debris from squirrels or something that's been all cleaned up nicely. Nice job. John was here, Joyce, Kathy Araldi, Kathy Durgis, Doreen, Liz, and maybe some others I forgot, but thank you for doing that. June 2nd, there is a warrant item at the town meeting about the town accepting the first meeting house from Unitarian Church. I hope everyone's informed about that and will come to the town meeting and vote accordingly. There's some information out here if anyone hasn't heard about it. June 7th is the Hubbardston Fair, and will be a present at the fair with a display of toys from years past. Okay? And we're not talking about Pong and all that stuff, we're talking about old stuff, right? So that'll be great, and if anyone wants to spend a little time at the booth to relieve Kathy and others, please do. June 14th is our annual pie sale and fundraiser, and it's been very profitable for the society to have the pie sale and summer social. We sell out every year, so please come and buy a pie, and if you want to donate a pie, please do. We sell out every single pie that people bring down. Any other announcements that I should be telling people about? Okay, let's get the program started. Tonight we have Ms. Pam Mitchell, who will be talking about Common Pond cottages and more from 1916 to the present. And Common Pond's always had a fascination. You know, Indians used to hang out and visit with each other, and they dug a machoon out of the pond back in the 1800s just to prove that they were there and everything. And then people have been fascinated with this beautiful body of water since the early settlers were here, good fishing spot, etc. So Pam will be talking about some of the early cottages on the lake, on the pond. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. I can't believe how many people came. I'm going to be sitting and reading because it's a little bit easier for me because I also have to click through slides, so pardon my back. Is the mic on? Okay, that's good. All right, so actually before I begin, I just need to explain that the original slideshow I made was a Google slideshow for the residents of Comet Pond. And once the Historical Society asked me to do this, then two people, Liz and Doreen, in the Historical Society, figured out how to move it from the Google slideshow to a PDF and then make it work with the library's equipment here. And once all that happened, then I finally started actually thinking about how to present this. And that's when I figured out that I should have done that first and rearranged some of the slides. So we're going to sit on this slide for a while, and I apologize for that. I don't have a nice, pretty one to show you. Okay, so since I was 3 years old, I have spent summers on Comet Pond and have lived there full-time since I was 24. To put it in context, I'll be 66 in 2 weeks. So I have to say, it all started with my mom. She grew up in the city of Worcester, and she spent her summers in rural Rutland in an old farmhouse, which initially had no electricity and no running water, but lots of open fields and a little swimming pond nearby. So she was used to being in somewhat primitive living for the summers. Fast forward to the late spring of 1962, when she was not really looking forward to a summer with a 3- and 7-year-old in the town of West Boylston with no nearby swimming. Luckily, her parents went to a function one evening and asked a couple they knew if they were at their summer camp yet on Comet Pond. And they said, well, you know, we've actually put it up for sale. So my parents and grandparents pretty much rushed out there the next day, saw it, and then called the couple and said they wanted to buy it. So that house is right on Route 62, right next to the boat ramp. My grandfather was a lawyer who did a lot of land and deed work, and so that was 1962. 1970, he came across an estate in which there were no heirs, but there was a camp in it on the west side of Comet Pond, and my parents decided they'd purchase that one to kind of ensure that they would always have a place on Comet Pond. They were afraid, because their camp was so close to Route 62, if 62 ever got enlarged by the state would take the cottage by eminent domain, and then they'd have nothing. So they got the second camp, and they used to rent that out. So it all worked out really well, because I ended up with the second camp, and my brother ended up with the first camp. So we would move out to Comet Pond the day school ended and move home to West Boylston the day before school started. And then, which is really different because I don't know how, but summers lasted forever. Today they don't seem to last that long. But the days would be filled with the water activities, walks along the pond, picking blueberries, reading in the hammock, and all those sort of things. One of my dad's pastimes was to watch the activity at the boat ramp. The people who knew the lake would launch their boat and motor down toward the left side from the boat ramp, or the west side, and head to the other end. The newbies would take off down the center of the lake, and if they were unlucky, they would suddenly hit one of the rocks of the submerged stone wall, ending their adventure a little bit early. So why was there a stone wall in the water? As I got older and really asked that question, I was basically told because the lake was expanded at one point. But when was it expanded, and why was it expanded? I was also always told that there used to be more cottages along the east side of the pond, which is the right side from the boat ramp. They were supposedly wiped out during the 1938 hurricane, and then the state, which is now the DCR, bought them up. Comet Pond feeds into the Ware River, which eventually drains into the Quabbin Reservoir, which supplies the water to metropolitan Boston. So they wanted to protect the watershed by buying up as much land as they could. So again, I always wondered, where were those cottages and who actually had lived in them? So fast forward to 2019, and the Pond Association asked me if I would take over the job of being historian. I jumped at the chance and was really excited to try to find the answers to those questions. So I was given a whole pile of papers gathered by the previous historians, and one of the more interesting ones, I can make this work, was this. This is a piece of correspondence from the first Pond Association, dated January 1930. It was inviting the property owners to join into an association for good fellowship and to determine the owner's rights as far as the water privileges go, as there was talk of the state taking over the pond due to the building of the Quabbin Reservoir. But looking at it, I was also fascinated that this was a letterhead, and all of the officers and executive board and committee members were listed. So looking over at all of those names, some of them I recognized as names that were still living on the pond, and some of them were completely unknown to me. So now I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, I've got a mission. I've got to figure out where all these people lived around the pond. So first, I looked into the Worcester Registry of Deeds online. If you've ever looked up property, you will often find yourself going down many rabbit holes and losing many hours of your life finding wrong answers. Along the way, somebody told me that the DCR, which is the Department of Conservation and Recreation, had an archivist who may be able to help me. When I reached him, he told me, yes, indeed, the state actually takes pictures of any structures on the properties that they purchase before they take them down. They have big books cataloging all of these pictures. And yes, there were cottages from Comet Pond in the books. So I was totally thrilled. However, I couldn't go to see them because they were in the middle of moving to a new building. But the good news was that they were also working on putting the pictures out online on their website, and hopefully in like 6 to 9 months they'd be out there. So in the meantime, I started to look at old maps of the town. And this is Hubbardston. And here's a close-up of Comet Pond from 1855. And if you know the shape of the south end of Comet Pond, this is not what it looks like today. And I realized that obviously right away. I'm like, something's different. So it's indented on that southern part, which is on the right-hand side of the picture. Then this map from 1870 shows a much different shape of the southern part of the pond. So definitely something had changed between 1855 and 1870. So among all the other things that I was doing, I read the Stowe's history of Hubbardston, and he finished writing that in 1873. It wasn't actually published until 1881, but it finished writing it in 1873, and he actually had a sentence about Comet Pond saying that it had recently been enlarged in order to make it into a reservoir. And I was like, aha, okay, so it was indeed enlarged, but again, who did it and why? So back to the collection of papers from the previous historians. She had asked property owners to send whatever memories and history that they had of their properties. And so one of them said that her deed had stated that Owen Marion, who was an early owner of her property, and you may know that name anyway, he owned a lot of the land at the north and west end of the lake. Anyway, he had granted easements of her property to the Ware River Manufacturing Company in 1867. So perhaps it was the Ware River Manufacturing Company that had enlarged the pond. About this time, my son gave me this really cool, I call it kind of like a reverse relief map. Instead of showing the elevations of a mountain, it's showing the depths of the lake. And if you look at the southern end and look at the 5-foot mark, it's indented like that original picture from 1855. So more evidence that, okay, it was definitely extended. Then, yeah, there you can see the difference, or the similarities. I got a hold of the pictures from the DCR. This is a picture of the dam from 1930. So this is the boat ramp from this angle is on the right-hand side. And there's a little house on top of it, so it was obviously being used as a real dam and controlling the water level. If you look at today's picture, you can see the water level is quite different. Okay, a lot higher today than at the time that this picture was taken. Well, on the picture it says that DCR purchased the land from the Ware River Manufacturing Company, purchased the land and the dam in 1937 or 36. So that pretty much proved to me that it's the Ware River Manufacturing Company that enlarged the pond, built the dam, and most likely did all of that so that they could control the water level going through the rivers to their mills. So I solved that mystery as far as I was concerned. Then, let's go back a little bit. Whoops, that's forward, sorry. Okay. This is where the original boat ramp was, which if you can see on the right-hand side, there's a stockade fence and a tree kind of growing out of it. That's where my parents' house is. So the boat ramp was right there initially. And in 1967, the state built the boat ramp here. And the year of 1967 was one of my favorite years of playing because I had a beach in front of my house. They lowered the pond enough that I could play with my little trucks and trolls and go camping on the beach with the trolls, not with myself. It wasn't that big. So this was in 1967 that they built the boat ramp, and in the 2000s they updated it. Forward. Okay. Now what happened? All right, I'm pushing down. I'm pushing either way. There we go.
Well, you should be pointing it at that.
Oh, with this. Sorry. Okay, so there's the dam, the old dam. Behind this is from 1930, the outlet behind the dam. Here. Oh dear. It's all filled in. And then a little further down is what we've always called the spillway. So again, from the boat ramp, you're going to the right along the dam edge and come to this little bridge, which is where the water actually exits from the pond now. And this is today the only exit of the water. So if that gets dammed up with leaves and branches and stuff, the pond level stays pretty high. So some of us periodically go over there and clean it out. Okay, so once I was able to access the DCR pictures of the cottages, the next issue was trying to figure out their location on the pond. The pictures had the property owner listed on them, the date the picture was taken, and then the date that DCR purchased it. There was notation of actually where it was, but honestly, that seemed to be in some kind of secret language. I couldn't figure it out. So I called again and asked the archivist about this, and the gentleman actually sent me pictures of this huge wall map that they have, but that didn't really help me out either. So over time, basically what I ended up doing is gathering plot lines from various people, this shows how the water goes from Comet Pond on the right all the way to the Quabbin. Okay, so here are plot lines around the whole pond. So this is part of how I figured out where the houses were. I also figured it out from looking at each picture actually did have an arrow that showed where north was. That helped a little bit. And then looking at the orientation of where the water was compared to the house, I put it all together. So once I had everything located, I made up this map, and basically in 1930, this is where there were cottages around the lake, as far as I can tell. In 1930 was the year of that correspondence that I first showed you, so that's why I picked that year. So then I wanted to go around the pond and take pictures of the actual sites where the houses were. And this is where my husband graciously agreed to accompany me on a late fall day in November when the leaves would be gone, and that would improve our view. So for the slide presentation, I started at the boat ramp and moved counterclockwise around the lake. So I went to the right. So again, from the spillway, instead of going straight where there's an actual road, which is called the East Comet Pond Road, because it's the east side of the lake, there's a little path that hugs the shoreline. And if you follow that path, you come to a clearing, and that's where this house used to be. So this is Howard Dunbar's property. He was on the executive board. And as you can see, there are a lot of trees right around his house. The actual clearing, though, is pretty open. There's that. And let me just go a little further. This is where it's much more open. From here, you can go out to that East Comet Pond Road, and it's a fairly wide path. And it hasn't been overgrown much at all. There. So back to here, the point about the trees is in September of 1938, there was a major hurricane. And in all of my research, Hubbardston used to have the Hubbardston Agriculturalist monthly magazine that lasted for about 5 years. And the October edition of 1938 had an extensive write-up of the damage from the 1938 hurricane. And there was a little bit actually written about Comet Pond. And I'll quote a little bit of this. It said, "The beautiful pines around the lake are lying in a tangled mass, like enormous matches. All the roads to the cottages are practically impassable. Several houses, including the Dunbar camp, which is this one, the Red camp owned by the MDC, and the camp owned by Dr. Lowell, were buried under big trees." I don't know where the Red camp was because these are all in black and white. Obviously it wasn't this one. But I do know where the Dr. Lowell camp was, and it still is. It's on the east side. There were also 3 other damaged structures that were detailed in the article. So again, this gives credibility to what I was always told, is that the 1938 hurricane significantly damaged several of the cottages. The state, at some point, and I don't know how long this rule or edict lasted, had said that anyone that had a cottage on the pond, if they didn't sell it or give it to a family member, then they would have to sell it to the state. Obviously that changed at some point because cottages have gone out of the original families. So again, looking through the woods of this area, I tried to figure out where the house would have actually stood. And based on looking at the picture and the orientation to the water, it would have been right about here. There's also raised dirt and stone structures that look like it could have been parts of the foundation. Oops. I'm sorry, I guess I'm not good with clickers. Okay, this is also the Dunbar property. There's several outbuildings to the area. And what's really interesting about this is if you go straight across the pond from here to the west side, there's a little cottage that is now owned by the Careys, was owned by the Densmores. And Mr. Densmore had told one of the Careys, so basically I got this from the son-in-law, that one of these structures was brought across the ice and made into their camp. So because it's not a very detailed picture, we can't tell which one it was, but it makes for a very fun story. Nope, going the wrong direction. Okay, and right down by the water from that previous picture, there's these cement blocks, and they were probably, because they're cement with stone underneath them, they were probably the original dock for the Howard property. So now if you continue along that path, you come along these different pieces of lots that were properties. Let me turn to my next page. Okay, this one was owned by Arthur Sullivan. No, wait a minute, sorry, by George Minot, or something, M-I-N-O-T-T. Sometimes there's only one T there. He was on the executive board of that first pond association. And looking at this house, you can see it's on a little bit of a flat spot and then a little bit of a hill. And there's stones that were holding up this end of the house anyway. You can also see, if you blow up the picture, that that's actually an electrical meter right next to the right of the door with a pipe going down into the ground. That becomes significant when you're trying to find where that house could have been. And sure enough, if you can look really closely, on the right side, see if I can do this, right there is the pipe. So I'm only assuming it's got to be that pipe. The stones were set to be somewhat uniform, so not so randomly thrown around as nature and God throws them around. So it seemed like they could have certainly been part of that foundation. And the next house was Arthur Sullivan's. It's definitely on the hill. So again, this east side of the pond goes uphill pretty quickly. And you can see this is really built on the hill. There's not a lot to find to try to substantiate exactly where it was. This is another of the outbuildings or sheds that went with it. But again, looking around and digging through the leaves, on the right-hand side, there's kind of a pile in the middle of that picture there of stone and cement. So being cement, again, that's not nature, so it was probably part of where the house or the steps were. So the interesting thing about this one is down by the water, there's always been, as far as I knew, this cement square. And as a kid, the path went right up to it, and it was always filled with cans, usually beer cans. And again, it's like, what is this? It doesn't make any sense to me, and especially as a kid, I didn't know anything about structures. Well, now that I know that there was a house behind it, it pretty much makes sense that that was like their little pump house to be able to bring the water up to the camp. A lot of the camps around the lake used to take the water straight from the pond to get running water into their house. And the next house on the left is the original house that was here. This, in 1937, was owned by William Jewett. It then went to a Mr. White, which some people know the name of Mr. White and called it the White House. And then eventually it got to this guy, Mr. Kemp, who tore it down and rebuilt, or not rebuilt, built the log cabin that's on the right. And you have to remember again that I took all these pictures in the late fall, so it's not a nice, pretty summer picture. And hopefully one of these days I'll go around and take nice, pretty summer pictures so that you can really see what the houses look like. But this is actually Ed Blanchard's house. And Ed was the initiator for the second pond association in 1984, and it formed fully in 1985, and he was the first president for a while. So that's really cool. And again, this is some of the outbuildings from that same property that they're not quite there anymore. Go a little further north from Ed's house and you get to this house. This was the original house that was owned by Raymond Palmer, who was a doctor. Lots of the people that owned places around here were physicians. And Dr. Palmer was on the executive board of the First Pond Association. And his house was sold in 1956 to Carl Larson, and the Larson family still owns it. They have enlarged it a bit, and you can see on the right, but the original house structure is still in there. And the really fun thing is that the chimney and fireplace are still the original. And I had a conversation with the son one day, and he was like, yeah, you know, I really want to take that chimney down because it's just in the way. It's just this big thing in the middle of the house. But that has a fun story to it. he didn't tell me this story because it wasn't his generation. Previous generations used to go out to the camp, and along the road to access this house is the East Comet Pond Road, and there used to be a gate across it at the dam, and they would make sure the last person locked the gate, and they'd hang out at the house for the evening. And over the fireplace was a picture of George Washington. And so the goal, apparently, was, this is all the hearsay, to cover George Washington's face with beer cans. So they had to stack them up. So that's what happened throughout the night. Now, these are old outbuildings. And this house is now it's a foundation. It's, again, a little bit further north of the Larson house. And the foundation you can see is big rocks, and then there's big cement stairs that go down. So here's the foundation, a little bit closer, and here are the stairs. Getting taken over a little bit, but they're still there. And at the top is the railing. And then here's the view that they had of the lake. Of course, they probably had a fewer trees then. And the next house, this is still the original house from the 1920s, and it was owned by Charles Osland, and he was the second vice president. So they had a president, a first vice president, and a second vice president, and then a secretary treasurer. So he was the second vice president of that pond association. And I forget how long ago, but a few years ago, work was being done on their chimney, and on the top of the chimney, the year 1920 is listed. So the house was most likely built in 1920. So Mr. Osland worked at Norton Company, and at least this is the way I remember the story. I'm pretty sure I got it right. William Thorell also worked at Norton Company, and the two found each other and made a transaction in 1967. Well, Warren Thorell's wife used to come out to Comet Pond all the time as a child, swimming and everything, and just absolutely loved it. And so one day, Warren said to his wife, let's go take a drive. And they take a drive, and they get to the pond, and then they start going down that dirt road, and she's starting to get really nervous, saying, you can't do this. This is a private road. We shouldn't do this. You should turn back. And he's like, no, it's okay. We're just going to look. It's okay. And they got all the way down to the house, and he turned to her and says, happy birthday. So she was thrilled, and her daughter still owns a house. Warren is still around. I believe he's 101, maybe 102 now. So this house is the one that I couldn't figure out where it is. If you look at the picture, it's obviously way up on the hill and overlooks the lake. It doesn't look like there's much of a foundation at all. I actually have a picture of the lake from Route 62 looking down the lake from 1888. That's courtesy of Gary Kangas. And this whole hill area has no trees. So this is 1930 or 30s, 31 I guess is when it was purchased. So it's probably pretty high up on that hill because there's still a fair amount of not too many trees around. But anyway, it was Annie Heald's house, and the Heald family owned a lot of land around Comet Pond, a lot of the fields. So who knows where it was, but somewhere up there. Here is one of the resident eagles, just for fun. We have at least one pair of eagles. They had a baby a few years ago, and it seems like that baby sometimes comes to visit, so that sometimes there's three. And the fun thing about the eagles is that they know when the fishermen are out there. And the fishermen, being true fishermen, just want to catch the fish. They don't necessarily keep them, so they throw them back in the lake, and the eagles are watching. And as soon as the fish gets thrown, the eagle swoops down and grabs the poor little fish that thought he had a second life. So from where we just were to here, there's a big tract of land that's state-owned land. And then we got to this group of cottages, which is the Washburn family. Here's kind of a better picture of the cottages. And the first Washburn, Dr. Frank Washburn, started in the early teens is when he got property here, and I have no idea when the houses were started to be built. But so Dr. Frank Washburn Sr. was a well-known thoracic surgeon in Worcester, and he also was one of the instigators to start what eventually became the Holden Hospital. So that's kind of cool. Now from this orientation to the right, which is a little bit south, is the only real significant feeder stream that goes into Comet Pond. And it comes down the little hill there that's kind of a mini mountain. It's supposedly half the height of Mount Wachusett. And the Washburns, I'm not sure if it was Frank Sr. or who, named it Candy Mountain. The rest of the pond is fed by springs. So here's a little more of the river. It was running quite well then. And you go a little further north and you come to this A-frame. And this is fairly new. It was built in the 60s by a Dr. Jones. And if any of you were following, I don't even know where it was advertised, but this was finally up for sale. The same family has owned it. The most recent part of the family lived in Delaware, and they would come up here for like 6 weeks of the summer. But anyway, it just recently sold in the fall, and the rumor is that it's going to be torn down and a new thing built, which is what happens to most things. And this is another little tiny feeder stream. This comes down from, we're now on the north end of the pond, so this comes down from Old Princeton Road. And then we come to what's probably the most famous property on Comet Pond, which is the Cathedral Farm. And this all starts with Orr and Marion. This picture is from the, I don't know when, 1860s, 1870s. He owned a substantial amount of land around Hubbardston and farmed, or around Comet Pond, and farmed it. He fought in the Civil War and apparently was injured in the Civil War, so he died fairly young in 1878. And his children, Valletta and Roland, built a house. Although I was looking at this recently and it looks like the house is actually in this picture. So who knows whether they actually built the house or he built the house or what, but the house, according to all the records, was built before 1885. And here's one of the earlier pictures of the Cathedral Farmhouse. And so after they built it, then they turned it into the Lakeview House, or they named it the Lakeview House, and they would rent out rooms for the week for $5 to $8 a week, which is kind of cool.
We still do.
You still do? Really? Great. So just remember that.
Meals included.
Or Marin moved that barn down from across the house.
Right. The barn he was standing in front of, he moved and changed the orientation of it. Right. So here's other pictures of the house. So from the Lakeview House, it was bought by the Wachusett Sanatorium, Inc., who then named it the Wachusett Rest House, I guess. And they electrified it and added hot and cold running water and ran it as a year-round resort. Don't know how much that one cost per week or whatever. Then in 1920, the St. Paul's Episcopal Church of Boston bought it along with a whole bunch of land around it and farmed it. So they had farm animals there, cattle and who knows what else, and lots of vegetable farming and everything. And so it became the place for people from, especially church members from the city of Boston, to be able to go out to have a summer vacation in the country. And they set it up so that some weeks were for just the boys, some weeks for the girls, and some weeks for the family. What's really interesting with this, so my profession was as a physical therapist, still a physical therapist, and at one point when my kids were young, I used to do home care. And it's amazing how many people I met through that I had connections with. And one of them was one of the campers. He lived in Paxton at the time. I cannot remember his name, but he told me about the camp and how they, would have classes for beading and fishing and different things, and that the boys had to be in the little bunk houses and the girls got to be in the house. And there was a separate mess hall, and he actually drew me a plan of what he remembered it looked like, and it's pretty close to what the Meagers have told me. So that was pretty cool. Let's see. I had to change my page here. Okay, so in about 1949, I think, is when St. Paul's bought land in Winchington, or a farm in Winchington, and started moving all the animals to there and kind of started phasing the farm out. Let me back up a couple years. If I got the years right, about 1947, Benny Meager, Robert Meager, who's sitting here, with his daughter, got out of the Army. Was it the Army? And came home and got a job with a heating company. And one of the things that he ended up doing is coming to this house and moving the radiators from one side of the house to the other and putting in some kind of a heating system. So that was kind of his introduction to the house. And somehow or other through that, he wheedled his way into becoming the caretaker for the farm.
I think wheedle is not that. Probably accurate, but.
$1,850 a year.
Right.
That's what I work for.
And so in 1950, he got married and moved into the house, and again was a caretaker. But again, St. Paul's was transitioning the whole operation to another place, and in 1953, they wanted to sell the whole place. So Benny was able to purchase the house and 500 feet of frontage with the barns, and one of his, well, I'm sure there were lots of purposes, but one of the things that he did at that point was started raising chickens. How many chickens was it?
Oh God, 10 to 14,000.
Yeah, it was a lot of chickens at one time. And
Don't recommend it.
anyway, he got that part, and then there was still a whole nother tract of land that Roland Erickson was able to purchase, and that had 1,500 feet of lake frontage. Roland was a bank president. He divided the land into 3, and he sold one lot to Robert Stoddard, who was the CEO of Wyman and Gordon, and he owned and flew a helicopter. Oops, back up. I didn't talk to you about this part. So St. Paul's Cathedral, among other things, had choir boys, and they would have choir practice, and the beautiful choir sounds of the music would reverberate all the way down the lake, and people at the other end of the lake who were still living at the time that I was growing up used to tell me about hearing the music coming down the lake, as well as hearing taps. This is a picture of the altar that was on the 3rd floor of the barn, and a beautiful view of the lake. The house is on the right, Cathedral Farm is on the right. On the left is what was the mess hall, and then the kitchen area was to the right of that. Campers from camping days, camp counselors, and this is kind of out of order. This was from 1913, a view down from Cathedral Farm along the whole lake, and the apple trees aren't there anymore, but the other trees have grown up quite a bit so that the lake is a little cut off now. It's still a beautiful view. And here's modern day. Here's Benny and Sue on the right, and on the left, the younger boy is Benny after he went on some kind of fishing expedition with his older brother. Okay, here's the aerial view of now North Comet Pond Road that accesses a few of the houses on the north end. And this was taken most likely from the helicopter of Robert Stoddard. So he originally, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here, lived in this cottage. This was known as the Dean's Cottage, which was the dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, apparently the one that kind of ran the camp and everything during the summertime. So this was, I don't know when this was built, whether St. Paul's Cathedral bought the land in 1920, so most likely this camp was built after that around the same time. So it should be on my original map, but I didn't put it on it. So we'll back up. After a few years, he built this, which was called the Big House. And this is the water side of the house. And this is the view today. And honestly, I don't know, because even the aerial view shows a lot of the trees, so I don't know if they ever actually had a view of the water. But certainly there was a lot of field, there still is a lot of field, and so it was easy for him to land his helicopter. Pretty nice, huh? So this house, the Ericksons sold the Big House eventually and moved back to using this house, and then eventually they sold this house in 1985 to the current owners. And one year I was able to walk through their house, so it's definitely campy. And this is the Ericksons' original dining room set that they left for them. Comfy area for reading, and this was the bunkhouse where 2 sets of bunk beds, lots of people, and then various artifacts around the house. Now, Roland Erickson's daughter built this house about 1975, and apparently she got married in the field and lived in the house, and unfortunately eventually got divorced, and the house was sold to this family. And these are all the beautiful laurel bushes down by the water. And it's since turned over to another person, and now the house is white. And again, this is the view from the water. The next house, this was Robert Stoddard's house. So even though he owned the helicopter, he didn't build a huge expansive house. It was a nice little cottage. But eventually it got old, and in 1922 his daughter tore it down and they built this post and beam house. But the fun thing with that is that they kept the fireplace and chimney, and that's now an outdoor fireplace and chimney. So there's a cement area in front of it that I assume that they use to be able to do a fire in the fireplace. And at the top of their driveway is this structure, which used to be an altar that St. Paul's Cathedral would use for out in the woods. Clicker. Okay, and then we come down to the last house on this road. This is Dr. George Dunlop's house. He was the other person, Erickson divided the area into 3 lots. So this was the third one. And obviously the house is right on the water. This was 1953 that he bought the land, whether the house was built in 53 or 54, I'm not sure. But the water was lowered so that they could build the house. The front wall is the edge of the lake. And there they are, the dock is completely on the water. And in the wintertime, they have a fan that keeps the water circulating so that the ice doesn't ever form against the foundation of the house. And Dr. Dunlop was a pretty renowned heart surgeon, I believe, or vascular surgeon. And he lived to 101. And he was another person that I met. He lived at the Eisenberg Assisted Living, which was one of the places that I used to go to a lot for to do physical therapy treatments. And he was always walking the halls. He was an avid swimmer at the pond. He would swim every morning before he went into work, and his wife would also be swimming a lot. Again, pictures. Here's a close-up of them in their later years. And one of their boats, view from their dock. From the inside of the house looking out, they have a whole wall of sliding doors. It's just beautiful. And they do spend, so it's now his daughter that's in the house. She has remodeled it enough to just shore up the house. She didn't do any major changes to the outline of the house. So that's the end of the road, but there are still 3 more cottages that were there, again, back in 1930, and this is a plot line of them. So in this picture, there's a stone wall on the right side. To the right is north, to the left is south. So to the right is Dr. Dunlop's house. To the left now is the lot that was Jenny Sawyer, and this is her house. Trying to find the orientation of this was a little difficult because there's a lot of trees. And the interesting thing we found here was this hole that's lined with rock. So it may have been a very shallow well to be able to, again, provide water to the house. And this was the flattest, most clear area that we could find there, and it may have very well been where the house was. Other than not having trees there, there wasn't any good way to say that that's, there were no rocks that looked like it could have been part of the foundation. And this would have been the view. And now moving south, this is the next house, Edward Pfeiffer. It's hard to tell. The land here is kind of the back lot was Pfeiffer and the front lot was Davis. So, but the house is being listed as Pfeiffer, and this is closer to the water than what the plot line shows. So I'm not sure how all that works. But the Davis name, there was an Elgin Davis who was on that first Pond Association list of names. Let me try to get to, yeah, so he was on the executive board of the first Pond Association. So looking at this house, the foundation, so of course I have the advantage of looking at the picture directly from the DCR website, and you can blow up the picture and see things a lot better. But the foundation is made of smaller, like 4 to 5 inch diameter stones. stuck in the cement. And walking around, there's a lot of foundation that's still there, with lots of cement. So this is clearly where that house was, with their chimney. And since this, so this was 2022, I think I was there, it might have been the next year, I had walked through, and a couple of big trees had fallen over the foundations. And this is their view. And from the water's edge, they had quite the nice view of the lake. And there's one more property, this one, Gladys Mitchell, no relation to me. Yeah, that's the only picture that I have of the house, so it doesn't show me where exactly the pond was, how close the house was, but looking around again at the land, you can see kind of a trough there. It's in the shadows, just to the right of the tree that goes down the middle, the tree shadow that goes down the middle. So again, trying to research all of this, one of the things that I did was read a book about stone walls, which is pretty interesting. So when you take the house off of the stone wall, then eventually the land, the dirt starts to push the stones inward and they fall into the cellar hole, and you end up with troughs like this. So someday I'll go back and with my son and dig through all the leaves and see if he can find some of the stones to see if I was right that this is where the house was. And this would have been the view from that area. So from here, we're pretty close to the State Beach. So this was built in 1976. And one of the things I didn't talk about growing up, when it was a hot summer day, from our camp looking over to the boat ramp, you would see wall-to-wall people. And I do have a picture of that at the very end of this. Summer days were loud, noisy, but happy sounds. And that's what a hot summer day was to me. So after the beach was built and people were strongly encouraged not to be swimming at the boat ramp, it was quiet, and it took so long to feel that a hot summer day didn't have to be loud and noisy. It really did take me several years to feel that that was right. So from here, now we're on the west side, start moving further down, so we're going south. There's a big tract of land that's state-owned. This is State Beach, so it was built on state land. So you get further, and you start to come to some of these houses. This is the same house. This whole group of houses now that we're going to look at are accessed by two different roads. One is the West Comet Pond Road, and one is Murrow Lane. All of that area was originally owned by William Jefferson, who was a farmer and a mill owner, lumber mill. His house is the big white farmhouse on the corner of Route 62 and 68 and the dirt road Halfrey Lane. That house still exists. I've talked with the present owners. He said that they, not at the time that they owned it, but that there was barns all the way from the house to the present, the barn that's still there, so that you could walk through all of the barns and not have to go outside to be able to tend to all the animals. So the houses along West Comet Pond Road, William Jefferson had this guy divide the area into lots in 1910. I have that kind of plot line of lots from Fred Blood was the name of the guy, and gradually he sold those off. So this house and the next one was sold to the Lowells, and descendants of the Lowells still own this property. They haven't been out to the house to do much to it for a long time, but they do have the property maintained. They have the area mowed and taken care of that way. Turning, looking at the lake, they most likely had a much better view of the lake until all the trees grew up. Oh, wait a minute, I have to tell the fun story about this is in the 50s, the Lowell sisters lived here, and Benny told me this cute story that one day he and his wife went out to dinner, and when they came home, the phone was ringing off the hook. And it was the Lowell sisters saying, "You've got to come and get the cattle or the steer. They're in our front yard." So you kind of get a sense this is quite a ways from the cathedral farm. So he took his flashlight and he trudged through. Some of it was farmland, most of it was woods to get to here and gather up his steer and try to get them to go all the way back. So apparently what would happen is the fishermen would be insistent to get down to the water, and they'd cut through his fence and of course not repair it, and the cattle would get out. Next. This house was also originally owned by the Lowells, changed hands a few times. At one point, the people that owned it, the house is still only 2x4s in the inside for the most part. You know, it doesn't have plastered walls or barn board walls or anything. But somehow they found a bill from William Jefferson, and it's dated July 1922. And it's for eggs and milk and board from April to July. So the eggs and milk came to $28, and then the board was $42 for that 16-week period. So that was kind of cool to know what actually was happening back in 1922 there. Again, heading south now, this is the next little cottage. I don't know exactly when this one was built, but it's being used on a regular basis and has lots of happy memories for the people. This was owned by, William Jefferson to begin with, and then Alexander Bullock. He was on the First Pond Association. Let's see, he was the first vice president, and he apparently owned 3 different spots along the pond, but this land is continued to be owned by the family of the Bullocks. There's actually numerous family members that have a piece of the deed or whatever. And Rick Bullock, one of the, I don't want to say older members, but he is one of the older members. He has lots of fond memories of when he was a kid being on the pond, and he was our secretary of the current Pond Association for well over 25 years. And anyway, when he was younger, he actually started a ski club on the pond with Brent Erickson. So it was Roland Erickson that originally bought the land, so his son, and so that's the north end, and then on the south end, Frankie Griswold. So they had this little ski club, and initially they were skiing with a 7.5 horsepower motor. I don't know how they did that, but they were young and probably very light. But anyway, with the ski club, they decided that they needed a ski jump, and so they found a ski jump on another lake and hauled it over here and had it here for a number of years in the 1960s. Some of you might remember it. I remember it, and I do have a picture of that at the very end. What was interesting about the story of the ski jump is how many people told me their versions of the story, and it wasn't until I finally got it straight from Brick Bullock that no, nobody actually built it that lived on the pond. They actually bought it from somewhere else and brought it to the pond. But it was just interesting. Everyone had their own version of that. Okay. Then you come to this little bathhouse. This was owned by the Allen family, but it also got it from William Jefferson. And on the right-hand side is Tom Allen. He's one of the ones that I knew, and he would come, he lived in Princeton, and he would come practically every day to go swimming, to go windsurfing, to chat with people, and he was just a very gregarious person. He finally sold in 1992, and the house, I mean, I'm not sure when this picture was taken. Oh, it does say picture 1992, and it looked pretty decrepit then. So it was eventually torn down, and this house was built, which is actually quite a nice little house on the inside. And these people love to swim also. They're out there in wetsuits swimming a lot of the year, which is why they have the wetsuits on. Then we come to this house. This was also a plot of land with a house on it that Alexander Bullock owned. And he eventually sold it to Dr. George Dunlop, the one who made the brick house that's right on the water. It was eventually sold to Don Mitchell, who is my husband. Fun thing about that is that he and I were, you know, sort of neighbors, but just like acquaintances, and never really paid a whole lot of attention to each other, and didn't know that each other was divorced, and met at the Bullocks, where the two little cottages were. They used to hold swim races in the summer, and we met at one of those functions. I say met, that's when we really talked. And the really fun part about that is that he apparently was impressed with me and emailed me to try to ask me out for a date right at the time that my computer crashed. So it was 3 weeks before I got the email, and I was absolutely mortified that 3 weeks had gone by and I hadn't answered him, and he had decided that I didn't care. But obviously I did. Anyway, his ex-wife now owns the cottage. Next to them is this property that was, it was part of 3 lots, and it's a little confusing to explain where these lots are, but this was built in 1985, and the person that owned the other 2 lots sold those off and moved to this lot. And then there's another picture of that. To the side of this, this is where the next house was. This is a little summer camp that's been updated. That was part of that property. And then to the left of this house is the other house. So there are now 3 houses on it, and then the little boathouse down at the bottom. The camp that you can see here has half of this land so that they have waterfront. This is pictures of the camp at the top of the hill before it was renovated. This is the little camp that was renovated. I know, a little confusing, sorry. But this is what I'm trying to get to. This is a picture from 1940. So back then, the family of the Blakes owned this. And this is closer down to the water. And so the Blakes, George F. Blake Sr. is of George F. Blake Steel Company in Worcester. And his grandson, F. Turner Blake, remembers being out here all the time and doing all sorts of winter sports and summer sports and just loving the area. This is the current location of where it was, where all those stones are. Winter picture, and here's F. Turner Blake. and shooting practice, target practice, all sorts of fun things. Yeah, you still hear that around the lake. But it's not him anymore. So the fun thing about him well, sort of the fun. So his step-grandmother ended up selling the property unbeknownst to him, and he was very upset about it because he didn't get a chance to actually own the property. Fast forward a few years, and his son ended up buying the property. And once it was Tim and Marie Blake, they just happened to see it in the paper that it was for sale, and then went to see it, and Tim's like, oh, I think this is that property, and bought it and brought out his dad, and his dad was like, yes, it absolutely was the property. So he was thrilled that it was back in the family. Unfortunately, they ended up getting divorced, and it's back out of the family, but oh well. This is the renovated house. And this is my house. So this is the end of Murrow Lane. So Murrow Lane is the other access road, and all of the land along Murrow Lane went from William Jefferson to Dr. William Murrow, and he then gradually divided up into lots and sold things off. And this was a guy named Miles. I don't know when this house was built, but it was close to the 1930s. It was at least built by 1937, and I'll show you that in a minute of why I know that. But this was after I'd already moved into it. So in 1984, I got married and moved into it, and we winterized it. The bottom is just a dirt floor. You can't access it unless you walk around and go underneath. In the back of that was the water tank and the water pipes, and so we kind of made a little room with that and winterized that and had a coal stove. And then the front porch is now all glassed in this picture. So after about 3 years of this, we decided to tear down and rebuild. And here it is now. Actually, it looks a little better now. We redid the front wall. But this is Dr. Murrow's house. So this is now south of my house. And this is a big flat area right down by the water. It used to be called Pine Point. And Dr. Murrow was the first president of the first Pond Association. He was president apparently only for 1 year, because the next year in 1931, all of the letterhead paper had changed, and if I look at my notes, I'll tell you who was the second vice president, who became the president, but he wasn't listed anywhere, so I can only imagine that he died. So his descendants ended up kind of on this property. So Robbie Gould, was my neighbor who, this was his grandparents. And he told me a few stories about his grandparents, and unfortunately at that point I wasn't as interested in history, so I didn't grill him very much. But his grandparents used to live in Ashland, and they would move out here for the summer. It would take them 2 days with their horse and buggy to get there. They would stop in Worcester for a night, and then they'd make it out to here. Sometime in the winter, some of the family members would come out and they would cut the ice and fill the ice house with the ice so that they would have ice for the whole summer. These are two pictures that Robbie always had in his house of the house. But the previous picture is the one that came from the DCR website. These are the stone steps that are still there, that I kind of sweep every year and try to keep clean. I also try to keep the foundation clean, somewhat. And here's another picture from the DCR website of kind of their outbuildings. And again, if you can blow up the picture, in front of my house there's a really long dock. It takes 70 feet to get out deep enough to be able to dive off the dock. That dock was also in the picture where F. Turner was target shooting. But it's also in this picture, and this picture is dated 1937. So the house was there, at least in 1937. This is the same basic view, and another view today. So let me just look at my notes for a minute. Oh, I know who became the second. The next president was Dodge. That'll come a little bit sooner, a little bit later, or almost done. This was the barn where the horses and buggy were kept. I was absolutely thrilled again when I found these pictures and remembered these stories from Robbie. And this was Robbie's house. And the peaked part, I believe, is where the original ice house was. And he built around it. So what happened is his grandmother in the 30s was getting nervous about what was going to happen with the state taking over land and the pond and everything. And she finally decided to sell the land except for where the ice house was. Ended up eventually getting it to Robbie. But the house, she had the house dismantled and moved to Sutton. And I don't know if it's still there or not. I haven't tried to research that, but that would be kind of neat to see. So the current owners had to tear down that house. It had been closed up for a few years and was full of mold and everything. And this is again where I need to go around and take the pretty summer pictures of houses. This is the winterized house with the plastic on the screens and everything. Just next door to them is this house. They actually own this one too. This was the family's original house. The children own this now. And this house is currently owned by the Careys. The Careys, Deb Carey's parents were the Densmores. And it was Mr. Densmore that told Mr. Carey, his son-in-law, about the story of the little cabin. So the slanted roof part is the original part of the house that was moved over from across the lake, across the ice, and into this spot. This property was originally owned by Carlton Dole, and he was the second vice president of the Pond Association. He owned a few pieces of the property, and I don't know if one of the pieces had a house on it at the time that he owned it or not. There's also, this is right down by the water. If you go up the little hill across the dirt road, Murrow Lane, you come to what the Careys call their up house. And the little structure on the right was the original, and they just, in the last few years, added on the back structure so that there's actually a nice place to sleep and a working bathroom. The interesting thing with this when they were building is that building code made them put in the hookups for a washing machine. They don't have a washing machine in there, but they could put one in. And next, the original of this house was owned by Raymond Gregory, who was in the First Pond Association on the executive board. And his brother owned this house. This was a little camp. So his brother's niece was the one who owned it when I was young and still owned it when I was older. She was the first historian of the Second Pond Association, and I always knew her as Miss Gregory. I believe she was a professor at Harvard. She lived in Cambridge. And the current owners rebuilt. This is now their retirement house, and I will say they did a great job with getting it to blend into the environment. And this was built, I believe it was in the, where was it? 69. Prior to that, it was used, the empty lot was used for the Boy Scouts to be able to camp. And here it is today. Current owner likes bright colors, and I was just so glad that she still kept the brown trim. But it disappears, and it fits her very well. Okay, this is the picture from 1888, and here's comparing 23 to 88, and again, it's hard to tell, but on the left, you can kind of see trees poking up, that the flat part between them is the flat hill without trees on it. These are more pictures from the Cathedral Farm camp. This was a postcard. Oh, this is kind of fun. 1914, I'm having a dandy time. Went out after strawberries and found some white ones. I will see you soon. Love, Mary. And other members of the pond. Here's the ski jump. It was quite the ski jump. By the time I finally learned to ski, I believe it was gone, but even if it wasn't, I'm sure I never would have had the courage to go off it. This is Dr. Dunlop skiing. An earlier picture of the pond. This is from 1966. The Bullocks, one of their descendants, Gus, had a pontoon plane, and where that now red house is, that at one point apparently was his land because he used to park the plane over there. And one of the people that I talked with remembers him pulling skiers behind the plane. I don't remember ever seeing that. I'm sure it happened because she said it, and she was an adult, so she would remember it better than me as a kid. But I do remember that somehow or other, my brother and I finally got to be able to go up in the plane, because we, of course, had watched it all summer, landing and taking off. And anyway, we got to go on it. And I remember being in it. I remember landing on the water because it was a hard land, but I don't remember being up looking down onto the pond. The big tall pine tree there fell down a few years after this picture. It was kind of like the iconic pine tree. And this is 1976. This was a typical day at the boat ramp. And you can see how a hot summer day was loud, happy noises. Yeah. And that's